blizzard. Everything was white. Alexa stared out the window, watching the snow bury the streets of their small Iowa town. She knew that if she made the decision now, this would be her last winter here, in the Midwest. Far away it would be warm, and more than that, she would finally have the chance to be herself again. Because after years of marriage to a farmer, she had completely lost sight of her own dreams. She couldn't accept this life any longer. Yes, she was a housewife with an excellent college degree. Had she really spent 5 years buried in books for nothing? She was raising 2 children, a teenage daughter and a younger son, practically on her own. Her husband was always at the farm, either meeting with suppliers or tending to the fields. Even though he had employees, he preferred to oversee everything rather than do the physical labor himself. They were well off. People often asked, "What more could you possibly want?" Alexa bitterly repeated to herself, "We have everything. Everything, except freedom." Even she wasn't truly in control of her own life, and she couldn't live in a cage any longer. He never asked, never said much at all. When was the last time she had heard anything warm from him? During the long winter nights, she thought about how to tell him her decision. Of course, he would never agree to move. Why trade stability for the unknown? That's what he would say. But Alexa knew it was time to change her life. She decided to start with a job, something that would allow her to stand on her own 2 feet. And she knew if she liked it there, she wouldn't come back. She would take the kids with her, give them a different future. Her husband was already training their son and daughter for farm life, repeating the same words over and over. "This is our land. These are our roots." Yes, the children needed to learn the value of hard work, but spending their entire lives among the fields, the way their father wanted? Number. That wasn't why Alexa had once dreamed of something better. She had searched for a way out for so long, and now it seemed she had found it. She knew the confrontation would be inevitable, so she made up her mind. Once the snow melted in spring, she would leave, and she wouldn't tell him until a few days before. The kids would stay with their father for a few weeks. Then she would return for them, and so she lived on, fueled by that dream, a future journey, a new life for herself and her children. But in the end, fate made the decision for her. It was Mrs. Blake, the kind neighbor, who finally opened Alexa's eyes. Eyes clouded by years of household chores and quiet resignation. Thanks to this wise woman, she learned the truth about her husband's so-called business meetings. One evening, just after Paul had left, claiming he had an urgent work matter in town, Mrs. Blake appeared at Alexa's doorstep. "Alexa, do you have a minute?" Alexa brightened. Finally, someone had come to visit. Paul never liked having guests. Not neighbors, not friends, not even family. Not that he had much family to begin with. He had grown up in foster homes, bouncing from one place to another. Alexa was 2 years older than Paul. Once, he had found comfort in her, a safe place. But she had needed care too, and never really received it. Their children were teenagers now, busy with their own lives. When they were at school or holed up in their rooms, Alexa felt unbearably alone. And so, in that moment, she was genuinely happy for the company. "Come in, Mrs. Blake," she said with a warm smile. But the older woman just shook her head and murmured, "I see Paul ran off again." "Yeah, he got a call from town, something urgent." Alexa shrugged. Mrs. Blake let out a small sigh, barely containing her frustration. "Oh, I know all about his urgent matters. Was it urgent 2 days ago too? And last week? Are you going to tell me he's just getting ready for planting season?" "Spring is right around the corner," Alexa replied hesitantly. The neighbor sighed deeply before lowering her voice. "I've been meaning to talk to you for a while. You barely leave the house anymore. Stuck between cooking and laundry? You don't see what's happening." And so Mrs. Blake began to speak. She had seen Paul in town, more than once, with a young woman. A girl, really. She couldn't have been much older than his own daughter. The girl would climb into his pickup truck. They'd shop together, walking out of stores with bags in hand. They sat in cafes, laughing, whispering. At first, Mrs. Blake thought, maybe she's his daughter from a past relationship, someone he never talked about. But 2 days ago, when Mrs. Blake had gone into town for a doctor's appointment, she saw them again. This time, Paul wasn't even trying to hide. Right there in the parking lot, he wrapped his arms around the girl and kissed her. "Believe me," Mrs. Blake said, shaking her head bitterly, "a father doesn't kiss his daughter like that." She had kept quiet for as long as she could, but not anymore. She had to tell Alexa the truth, and Alexa, stunned into silence, could only nod in gratitude. The neighbor had left, but Alexa remained standing in the crushing silence. The children were in their rooms. She glanced around at the walls that had long since become her prison. Now she knew everything. Even Paul's betrayal played into her hands. Now she didn't have to explain anything. Alexa decided the kids would stay with her parents in Nebraska for a while. They had spent enough time being tethered to the farm while their father ran around with some girl. But inside, a storm raged. How could he? How could he find someone else? They had started from nothing, together, built everything with their own hands. And now, when he had officially become the owner of the farm, he suddenly felt like the master of his own universe. She wouldn't stay with him, and she would take the kids. 15 years. 15 years of marriage thrown away for some young mistress. So much for quiet, reliable Paul. Unbidden memories of their early years surfaced. After their wedding, they had moved into Alexa's grandmother's old house. Paul was just beginning his farming then. First chickens, then ducks, geese. He built their enclosures himself. Later came the turkeys. They worked side by side, together. And now, when their daughter was born, Paul started dragging old machinery into the yard. Some of it given to him, some bought cheap. He had golden hands, capable of bringing any broken junk back to life. That was how they got their first tractor, then a small mill. The land rewarded his hard work with generous harvests. He worked alone because he knew he had no one to rely on. An orphan. He never accepted help from Alexa's family. "I don't want to owe anyone," he would say. When her grandmother passed, Paul took on the challenge of building them a new home. He cut down the old trees, planted young saplings. Nearly single-handedly, he built a spacious house. By then, their son was growing up. They had no close friends. Paul believed they were a distraction. Instead, he found a new passion. Livestock, cattle, horses, pigs. And so their farm was born. Alexa handled the bookkeeping. Now she sat at her desk, staring out at the snow-covered fields. Paul was still gone. He returned late that evening. Alexa realized something unexpected. She couldn't stay silent anymore. She didn't betray her neighbor, but her mind was made up. It was time to leave. "I want to build a life for myself, to take the kids somewhere. They'll have a real future. And you can't stop me, Paul. I know the truth." Paul's voice sharpened. "What truth? The kids belong here." Alexa met his gaze without flinching. "I know about your girl." Paul didn't even try to deny it. He let out a sigh and turned away. "Her name is Casey. We met a year ago. At first, it just happened, but now she's pregnant." The words hit Alexa like a punch to the stomach. Pain, bitterness. But maybe this was the answer to everything. She started packing. The next day, Paul didn't come home alone. Standing beside him was Casey, the girl, young, frightened, just a child herself. "Her parents threw her out when they found out she was pregnant," Paul muttered. "She's got nowhere to go." Alexa looked at the girl, and to her surprise felt no anger, only pity. Paul hadn't just ruined her life. He had ruined Casey's too. There was no more hesitation. Tomorrow they were leaving. "Mom, are we really going?" her daughter asked, her eyes filled with hope. "Yes." Alexa squeezed her hand. "For good." Paul tried to argue, but she only gave him a bitter smile. "Take care of your new family." He said nothing. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few $100 bills, holding them out to her. For the road. Alexa took not only her children, but also her younger sister. The four of them set off into the unknown. Behind them, the blizzard raged, burying the road under thick snow, as if sealing off the path back. Alexa didn't look back. She drove forward toward a new life, her eyes steady, leaving behind the pain, the betrayal, and the tears. She built a good life in her new country. Alexa quickly found a job, not in her field but stable. Over time, she got her degree recognized and even earned another qualification. Her sister Cindy found work too. and the kids settled into their new school. 2 years later, Alexa met a man, calm, dependable, with no empty promises. Danny became her rock. They got married, and soon after, they had a son. Cindy also found happiness. She got married and moved to another state. Alexa's daughter, Emily, grew up, graduated from college, and got married too. Emily and Alexa's youngest son occasionally flew to Iowa to visit their father. Paul was still running his farm. He lived with Casey and their daughter. Casey had changed, confident, full of life, skillfully managing their home and helping on the farm.